Hello there guys, welcome back, and this is this week's journaling with the Prisma Visions Tarot. This week I am documenting my feelings on the imagery of the Wheel of Fortune card. So just as the preamble, I guess, I talk about how I feel about the card, about the imagery and the messages that it struck me. This is just my personal feelings on it. We do start with the, albeit brief, description from the books. So I hope you enjoy, and if you have different feelings on the card, then by all means stick those down below. It's only my interpretation and my feelings as I was sort of visually engaging with the card itself. And we will zoom in a bit closer so you can see the imagery a bit better. It is quite glaringly light out, but we can't really complain about that, so there you go. So the meaning from the booklet: a peacock and a serpent are locked in vicious combat. A second serpent is entangled beneath, looking victorious, but consuming its own tail in confusion. A second peacock streaks in from above, determined to take part in the eternal, desperate struggle for dominance. Fortune favours the bold. Constantly vying for power may seem like a futile pursuit, but it is in fact a simple, blessed characteristic of life that is never at a standstill. The Wheel of Fortune shows the perpetual shifting in the balance of powers, manifested infinitely with every aspect of your life. At any given time, you will be the champion, be the contender, believe you are the champion, or have no reign at all, quickly hurtling yourself into the fray. This card suggests a change is coming. The old king is dead. Someone or something will rise up in its stead. A couple of quick thoughts that I had at the beginning of journaling this card was 10 being about completion and thus the end and beginning of something. As above, so below, as within, so without. And not long after choosing this card, I saw a snake Ouroboros in a Celtic knot with two roses crossed behind it, with the Latin, pretty sure it's Latin, I'll try my best. Omnia Vinvis est, we are one, beneath it. Okay, so we're going to talk then about my journaling, about the imagery and how the imagery struck me. The first striking thing about the imagery within the Wheel of Fortune card is the lack of an actual wheel in the physical sense, something most decks stick to quite rigidly. So it's interesting to see the wheel fall into the realm of symbolism and implication of movement here, although in a lot of ways it perfectly adjusts the message of the card by removing any static element in having a physical wheel that might portray. Instead, the flurry of colour is used to full effect, which is almost reminiscent of Van Gogh's Starry Night, knowing as we do, of course, that the artist took inspiration from Van Gogh. Now, hopefully, I can never really tell how the colour's going to come out when it's light like this, but you can see the sort of flurry of motion via colour here and here and here through flecks of light. The motion of the snakes and the peacocks is perfect too, as both have a very separate visual, but both imply motion. The peacocks are closer to the background, and the coloured specks, which even cross over onto the peacock's body. Let's see if I can zoom in a little more so you can see how the colour works its way into the peacock's body. Those flecks of light could equate to the night sky, or stars, as with Van Gogh's work, or perhaps a river, at least to my mind. Both of which would be inherently tied to the realm of the spiritual, at least from a sort of Celtic understanding. With Celtic understanding, rivers flow to gateways, and rivers are sort of in-between states between our world and the realm of the gods. The constant shifting of the stars is for the most part an optical illusion. It is us on the earth itself, that rotates. This plays perfectly into the imagery of the card, as it represents fluidity and motion through optical illusion. Meaning is derived from what we see, but can our eyes be fully trusted? It is only when we understand the meaning behind something, such as the earth rotating, that we glimpse insight into the bigger picture. When you also know that the stars are moving around the centre of the galaxy, but so slowly it wouldn't be noticed in many, many lifetimes, then you add to that the glimpse of understanding. Everything is constantly in motion, but the way in which we perceive that motion is limited. It also hints at the very limited experience that we as human beings are capable of in one lifetime. This notion again comes into play with the meaning of the card on a personal, individual level. Our lives are lived in cycles, constantly shifting through cycles of life, death and rebirth, very much like the turning of the wheel. For the most part, these cycles are symbolic in nature. We don't literally die and come back that often. It happens to people, but generally speaking, we're in the realms of sort of the symbolic cycles of life. As we grow, we move. We grow physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We move away from outmoded, outdated, and no longer useful elements of our lives, whether it be a place, a way of thinking, certain values, or even other people. We may not even be fully aware that this is happening to us until that particular turn of the wheel, that cycle, is complete. Only with hindsight do we understand, and through that experience learn to identify and integrate those lessons into our current life cycle, and arguably identify new cycles as we go on living. Though how much we commit to that understanding and the embracing of those cycles and lessons is again personal and individual. Some people may choose to completely ignore the lessons and sort of hash over certain patterns of behaviour, certain experiences over and over until they get the lesson, or they just don't. And then others may choose to identify and embrace the lessons as quickly and as much as they can. The peacock almost reflects the universe around it, being so close to the surrounding visual of the card, as the colour works through the peacock, as we said earlier. Only the tail seems separate and more defined, and the curve of the tail suggests another wheel cycle here present. Though it is worth noticing we are supplied with only most of the image of the tail. We do not see the base nor the tip. We do not see the beginning nor the end. So the base here is hidden from us, and the very tip of the tail is hidden from us. It could be that the peacock therefore is symbolic of the human condition, for we do not remember our beginning, our birth, and arguably our end, our death. Again, this interplays with how you feel about reincarnation and past life experience. But for the human condition on the whole, in a generalised sense. The serpents in this scenario then could be symbolic of time, the universe, and fate, something a lot of human beings feel to be in conflict with. They cannot fully control these vast concepts, and in the struggle to not feel so small in the grand scheme of things, fight against them. The possibility seems backed by the image of the victorious snake, victorious as in described by the author, the red one, who is devouring his own tail, the image of Ouroboros. Right, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, because if I'm not, then shame on me, but here we go. Nietzsche described the human fear of introspection, looking within, surrendering to the universe, when he said, "Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster, and if you gaze for long into the abyss gazes also into you." The real abyss is the one within, the self that grows through the many cycles of life, death, and rebirth that we have already touched upon. Inner demons and fragments of the broken self are dangers of these cycles. Perhaps when we sort of tear ourselves as part of the growing process. Perhaps when things go wrong. These things are part of our own inner abyss, and they frighten us, especially when we have to face them or deal with them. It is the oft-mentioned and little understood shadow work, as well as the dark night of the soul, that all spiritual seekers must face at some point, and those could be considered to be the inner jaws of the viper, the blue viper serpent at the top. The snake is knowledge, and often this is feared. Thus, when we glimpse the teeth of our own divinity, which we have hurt or broken in the cycles of living, we are afraid. But we must seek balance within and make friends with our shadow selves in order to attain any spiritual progression or growth. This is reflected in the phrase, "As above, so below, as within, so without." We are not really as separate from the universe as we maintain. Again, this is another optical illusion. To further drive home the point of Ouroboros, which Ouroboros has been following me around in terms of imagery for a while, and it started coming up again, so this will be interesting. Ouroboros is one of the oldest symbols in the world, and you can find it across culture and across history, and it really is ingrained into the human psyche. It's fascinating. I could do a whole blooming essay or book on Ouroboros alone, but I'll try and keep it relatively short for our purposes here. It's usually a snake or dragon, but usually serpentine in appearance with regards to dragon, devouring its own tail. It's representative of the cyclic nature of the universe, creation out of destruction, life out of death. The Ouroboros eats its own tail in order to sustain its life, therefore is the endless cycle of renewal. It also symbolises the fusion of opposites, the transcendence of duality, and often depicted in the lemniscale shape, the 8 on its side, becomes representative of eternity. The alchemy, I can never say, the alchemical, the alchemy textbook, more brain teasers, of Chrysopoeia, gold making, of Cleopatra, contains a drawing of Ouroboros representing the serpent as half light and half dark, echoing symbols such as yin-yang, which illustrate the dual nature of all things, but more importantly that these opposites are not in conflict. However, one of the snakes in the image is in conflict with the peacock. Perhaps this is the snake we see reflected back at us, that abyss staring back at us that we are so afraid of. The Ouroboros and even snakes themselves have a symbolic meaning pertaining not only to knowledge but to rebirth, to shed the skin and be born anew. The Ouroboros is even a sigil within the medical profession, which brings to mind the adage of knowing how to harm so one knows how to heal. Again, this is balance and understanding of opposites. The knowledge of how to harm another isn't positive or negative, only the human application of said knowledge is, or at least is perceived to be, positive or negative by other human beings. For example, a story of a man ending another's life via poison appears evil or negative on the surface. But what if that person is a serial rapist or murderer put to death via injection of poison at a USA jail? Or what if it is a mercy injection of a loved one via their personal request to save them from prolonged agony? I'm not suggesting that there is a right answer here, only moral judgments which differ depending on the individual processing the information. The whole image of the snake, of course, has come to be demonized and feared through the integration of human belief. On the surface of it, a person could judge the image within the card as the conflict or struggle between good/right, in inverted commas, the peacock, and wrong/evil, inverted commas, the snake. But even in simple imagery terms, the peacock has negative connotations, vanity being the most obvious, and the snake, positive ones, rebirth. The conflict isn't as straightforward nor as external as the surface image could suggest at first glance. Instead, it is the internal struggles we all face throughout our lives. We struggle within to understand what is good and bad within ourselves, but that is futile. The victory in the card is the Ouroboros snake, opposites not in conflict, but in balance and constant renewal. Yet the peacock continues to rush in, and the second peacock is up the top there. The human state is unlikely to change. We are always in chaos, in conflict with the external or internal struggles with ourselves. Perhaps that's why fortune doesn't really favour any man, and it's more optical illusion, more things we tell ourselves, to figure that she does. Lastly, the card really, for me, brings up the labyrinth image, particularly the Celtic labyrinth image. And I haven't got that to hand image-wise, but if you have a look up at the Celtic imagery, you'll see it. The real journey is within, to the centre of ourselves, for understanding the mysteries. The card really does strike me as being about the way we perceive things more than this element of the optical illusion and how we see parts of our life as being good or bad. It's interesting that change is just balance. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's how we perceive it, how we ingest it, how we eat our own tails with it, that give it meaning. We decide what the ups and downs of our lives are based on our beliefs and our sort of moral judgments. This card is fascinating. The whole deck is fascinating, how it takes the initial and sort of standard meaning of these cards and it kind of really turns it on its head. Because the standard meaning of the Wheel of Fortune is literally a change in fortunes. It's literally the shifting, the changing, the cycles. But this card hints at the bigger picture, that things are constantly in motion, constantly in flux, constantly vibrating at a particular level. And it's just how we apply our feelings and thought processes to particular situations that make it good or bad, inverted commas. So there you go. Again, I love this deck. I think it's amazing. And it really, really brings questions to how we interact with meanings of cards, of the tarot, and how we interact with meanings that we apply to our own lives. and how it's all subjective, it's all optical illusion. It's just fascinating. So that's it for this video. Many blessings.